The great feast hall of Eldhollow glowed with 1,000 beeswax lanterns, their light skimming carved ash pillars and flaring along banners of crimson and coal. Laughter rose like surf against the rafters. In the shadows near the door, a single bench sat unclaimed, as if the light itself avoided it. Upon that bench, Elowen Hardwick, the ward of a ruined house, beautiful in a way that court ladies whispered about and then pretended not to notice, hazel eyes ringed in green, auburn hair braided with a modest ribbon, cheekbones touched by dusk. 3 months had scoured her name. Her guardian, Lord Marek Hardwick, once steward to the Crown's northern granaries, had been executed for treason, grain diverted, seals forged, raiders tipped. Eldhollow drank, danced, and pretended not to see the traitor's ward. "Look how she dares to come!" someone hissed behind her. "Shame has no memory." Elowen fixed on her untasted ale. The bridal goblet traveled the high table. It would not circle toward her. She had learned the choreography of invisibility. Do not look up when slander passes. Do not flinch when laughter cuts. Keep the spine straight because pride is the only luxury that cannot be taxed. Bootsteps cut the din. The hall's noise bent around a tall figure as reeds bend around a swan. Rowan Thorn, the king's cousin, stoic, handsome in the clean, dangerous way of a drawn blade, wore midnight wool, silver threads at the cuffs like frost. A thin white scar tracked from temple to jaw. It made him look as if destiny had once tried and failed to erase him. His eyes were winter blue and kind in a way that could make enemies second-guess their choices. He stopped beside Elowen's bench and lowered his voice so that only her ghosts could hear. "4 words," he said. "Act like you're with me." She stared. "Your Grace." "Rowan," he corrected gently, extending a gloved hand. "For tonight." The gossip bees went silent. All at once every ear wanted to be a wall. Elowen thought of what a single touch would cost him. She also thought of how being erased felt like drowning while standing on dry land. "This is folly," she breathed. "The best kind," he said, with a prince's half-smile and a soldier's certainty. She set her hand into his palm, warmth closed over her fingers, firm, respectful, unhurried. As they walked toward the lantern-warmed floor, 100 eyes pretended not to follow and failed spectacularly.
The great feast hall of Eldhollow glowed with 1,000 beeswax lanterns, their light skimming carved ash pillars and flaring along banners of crimson and coal. Laughter rose like surf against the rafters. In the shadows near the door, a single bench sat unclaimed, as if the light itself avoided it. Upon that bench, Elowen Hardwick, the ward of a ruined house, beautiful in a way that court ladies whispered about and then pretended not to notice, hazel eyes ringed in green, auburn hair braided with a modest ribbon, cheekbones touched by dusk. 3 months had scoured her name. Her guardian, Lord Marek Hardwick, once steward to the Crown's northern granaries, had been executed for treason, grain diverted, seals forged, raiders tipped. Eldhollow drank, danced, and pretended not to see the traitor's ward. "Look how she dares to come," someone hissed behind her. "Shame has no memory." Elowen fixed on her untasted ale. The bridal goblet traveled the high table, it would not circle toward her. She had learned the choreography of invisibility. Do not look up when slander passes, do not flinch when laughter cuts, keep the spine straight because pride is the only luxury that cannot be taxed. Bootsteps cut the din. The hall's noise bent around a tall figure as reeds bend around a swan. Rowan Thorn, the king's cousin, stoic, handsome in the clean, dangerous way of a drawn blade, wore midnight wool, silver threads at the cuffs like frost. A thin white scar tracked from temple to jaw. It made him look as if destiny had once tried and failed to erase him. His eyes were winter blue and kind in a way that could make enemies second-guess their choices. He stopped beside Elowen's bench and lowered his voice so that only her ghosts could hear. "4 words," he said. "Act like you're with me." She stared. "Your Grace." "Rowan," he corrected gently, extending a gloved hand. "For tonight." The gossip bees went silent. All at once every ear wanted to be a wall. Elowen thought of what a single touch would cost him. She also thought of how being erased felt like drowning while standing on dry land. "This is folly," she breathed, The best kind, he said, with a prince's half-smile and a soldier's certainty. She set her hand into his palm, warmth closed over her fingers, firm, respectful, unhurried. As they walked toward the lantern-warmed floor, 100 eyes pretended not to follow and failed spectacularly.
Rowan led with effortless clarity, and Elowen, who had not danced since shame settled over her shoulders, found her feet, remembering. The musicians, startled into excellence, lifted a revering tune. "Breathe," he murmured as they turned. "I've got you. I've learned not to be caught," she said. "Then let them watch the catching," he answered, tone light, gaze steady. His hand at her waist was a vow written in warmth. "You are not alone for the span of this song." "Why?" she asked as they wove through couples. "Why risk your name for mine? Names are scaffolds." He guided her through a turn that made the candlelight crown her hair. "People are the house." The melody fell into a hush that made footsteps sound like secrets. When the final chord shivered the air, he did not let go. That refusal held the room. A few smiles tried to transact their way into the moment and failed. He bowed slightly, as if the entire hall had behaved as expected and owed them both an apology. At their vacated bench, he unpinned his cloak, a deep storm blue lined with white fox, and set it over her shoulders. The scent was cedar, steel, and sea. She hadn't realized how cold she'd been until the warmth arrived. "You court trouble, Rowan Thorn." "I court." He searched her face as if comparing a map to the country. "Truth." Before she could reply, Justiciar Malrek, the king's black-robed hound, approached with Eldhollow's lord, Edric Coldmere, whose laughter never touched his calculating eyes. Bowed courtesies tasted like old iron. "A curious choice of partner, Highness," Malrek said mildly. Mild for a man who hanged reputations on quiet mornings. Rowan's mouth shaped something like a smile. "The crown does enjoy curiosity. And you enjoy strays," Coldmere added, gaze on Elowen like frost. "They bite. And get put down." Rowan's posture didn't change, his voice did, one fraction heavier, like a blade accepts weight before the swing. "Careful, my lord. Some strays turn out to be wolfhounds." Elowen felt the hall lean. She could almost hear gossip deciding which way to bloom. She set her hands on the edge of the table to keep them steady. "My Lord Coldmere," she said evenly, meeting his eyes, "I am fluent in leaving. Would you have me rehearse here?" For a heartbeat, respect touched his features like lightning that never plans to return. Malrek intervened with that chilly softness. "Eldhollow welcomes all who honor law. It shuns those who break it. Then law should learn to tell the difference," Rowan said. They withdrew, the hall exhaled. The music tried again, braver now that danger had chosen a different corner. Rowan remained beside Elowen, an anchor you could mistake for a man. Morning smudged the eastern fog to pearl. Elowen woke not to dread, but to anticipation, a feeling she had avoided because hope often leaves a mark. A knock sounded. She opened to find Rowan clean-shaven, hair tied with black ribbon, cloak folded over his arm. "You left this," he said. "You could have sent a page." "I could have," he agreed. "Or we could walk the market and help the town practice having eyes." "The eyes already work. They only stare," he said. "Practice looking." He offered his arm. She took it because refusing would have meant returning the cloak twice. Eldhollow's market was a braid of bread steam, wet cobble, and bright cloths. Stalls thrummed with copper chatter. Women looked, then looked again and, strangest alchemy, smiled. Men assessed Rowan and found him immovable, then attempted politeness as if it were a new tool. At a bone carver's stall, Rowan lifted a comb carved with spiraling ferns. "It matches your hair the way spring matches thaw. You speak like a bard," she said, tasting laughter for the first time in months. "A poor one," he replied, buying the comb. "My verses only scan when you're near. Flattery is an expensive currency, Highness. I pay in kind." He offered the comb as if returning a coronet to a princess who'd mislaid it. People nearby watched the exchange with unembarrassed interest. Gossip raced down streets the way rainwater learns a city in one storm. They halted at a spicewoman's awning where jars crowded like small suns. "Elowen," croaked Mistress Thera, who had once crossed to the other side of lanes to avoid her. "You've gone thin. Come take saffron ends and marsh moss for your teas." "I never meant—" She fumbled, failed to find the excuse that wouldn't make the earth tilt. "Take them." Elowen's throat tightened. She accepted the gifts in the only way that saved everyone's dignity, naming each herb's use, asking after Thera's grandson's cough, recommending thyme and honey warmed in goat milk. Healing climbed back into her voice and sat where it had always belonged. By afternoon, the town had rehearsed a news story. Elowen Hartwick walks the market with Rowan Thorn. Therefore, perhaps shame has a shorter memory than mercy. Which is to say, perhaps we were wrong. They reached the riverside. Geese argued with the current. Rowan leaned on the low wall. "If you had never been made to kneel to lies," he asked, "what would you be?" "A healer," she answered without thinking. "Herbs. Baths. Leechcraft sometimes, but only when the moon says yes. I was learning. Then," she gestured at all of it, the river, the distant keep, the parts of her name that wouldn't come off in the wash. "You're still that," he said simply. "Trust is an instrument that breaks easily," she said. "I have no right to practice on people." "You have the duty," he countered softly, "to practice on people who need you." He didn't touch her, and somehow that made the words warmer. Conflict arrived early, carried on the breath of Magnus Var, a veteran whose memories were keener than his judgment. Word had run ahead of the market walk, now it ran back with interest. "Pretty, this performance," Magnus said in the practice yard, voice loud enough to invite witnesses. "Prince and trader's doll." Elowen stiffened. Rowan simply turned, not a motion wasted. "You need a new hobby, Var." "My hobby keeps children fed," Magnus snarled, meaning, guardians recall whose signs pay chits. He angled his chin at Elowen. "You keep broken things." Rowan's expression emptied, which was when men who knew him began to measure exits. "Apologize." "For what?" Magnus smirked, hand drifting to the blunted yard sword. "Calling a cracked cup a cracked cup?" "For not knowing the difference between a cup and a crown," Rowan said. "Now apologize." The words had no heat, which is how you know a forge is ready. Magnus drew. The ring of practice steel can be beautiful. This wasn't. Elowen stepped forward, voice clean and cutting. "Magnus Var," she called. "If you swing at me with your mouth again, try a tongue you can sharpen." Laughter broke where fear had been fermenting. Rowan did not smile. He removed his cloak, set it over the rail, and accepted a yard blade. The crowd parted as water does around a prow. They fenced, if you call a falcon stooping a fence. Rowan moved with a precision that made the air feel counted. He never struck to humiliate, only to conclude. The third exchange ended with Magnus flat on his back, Rowan's blade laid along his throat like a cool hand. "I asked for an apology," Rowan said. Magnus stared at the sky where a hawk wrote spirals. "Apologies are for men who mean their words." "Then be a man who does," Rowan returned. Silence grew until it had the shape of surrender. "Apologies," Magnus rasped, eyes striking flint toward Elowen then away. "My lady." "Accepted," she said, and by saying so gave him a door out of the burning house of his pride. That would have been tidy. Stories love tidiness, except that tidy is how conspiracies survive. In the gallery's shade, Justiciar Malrek watched the yard with an evaluator's chilled attention. His lips were a line the quill of law might draw when coercion looked like duty. Night carried news like a mule carries wine, stubbornly and with spills. Riders came from the north, cloaks all dirty, bearing a sealed decree, 3 harbors burned in moon's turn, grain stores unlocked as if by men with keys, hostages taken with uncanny efficiency. "They will say," Elowen whispered to Rowan by the riverside brazier, "that this proves Marek's guilt all along, that his network survives." "What do you say?" She stared into the oath fire, the old brazier whose flames elders used when vows must be forged in something sterner than breath. I say patterns make alibis for liars. If someone wished to cement my guardian's guilt beyond exhumation, they would repeat his supposed method. Loudly. Rowan considered her words the way a commander considers maps, eyes narrowed not in suspicion of the speaker, but in suspicion of the world. Then we need a pattern breaker. They brought the decree to her cottage lamp table. Elowen unrolled it with careful, reverent fingers. She knew the textures of royal parchment the way Fletchers know feathers. The seal was perfect. Too perfect. No travel crack, no grit in the wax, the watermark missing from the corner where the mill always left its tiny mill-wheel mark. The hand that scribed the legal formula was expert, but used a tail on the long south that court clerks had abandoned last year. Forgery, she said, voice small because the truth, when it comes back from the dead, dislikes being shouted at. A brave one. A practiced one. You're certain? There are 5 places your cousin the king would know to check, she said. I see all 5. He exhaled as if armor sits heavier when a lie is proven. Then we have a weaver who works from inside the loom. Malrek, she said, testing the name in air. Rowan's jaw worked once, a single muscle folding. If Malrek is what you think, we cannot stab this. We must show it. Before the hall. Before the gods. Before men who fear neither. Truth likes an audience, Elowen murmured. So does power, Rowan replied. We must give the first a louder stage. Dawn had not yet shaken the frost from the grass when knuckles like mallets beat Elowen's door. By order of crown and law, a voice called. She hid the forged decree where the gods might blush to find it, and opened to 3 men, 2 in the crown's livery, and 1 robed in black with parchment teeth. Lady Hartwick, said Ragnar Malrek, choosing a softer alias for his scythe. You will accompany us for questions. Question me here, she said. Our rooms are more thorough, he answered, looking past her at the neat herbs, the braided bundles, the poverty arranged with stubborn grace. He had the smile of a man who prefers confessions to facts. They took her to the old jail built when Eldhollow believed stone could govern men. The cell's iron bit the light as if it wanted to keep it. Alone, Elowen breathed shallowly and tried not to feel the shape of fear. She had chosen to be brave in the hall. Here bravery felt like a thin cloak in sleet. Outside, feet that knew how not to be feet moved. Rowan watched the door through which Malrek had passed with his prize. A glance, a touch to his wrist, a signal to himself, no missteps. No rage. Not yet. He went to Elder Brynjar first, the village's memory in a body that creaked like winter. Brynjar's eyes took in the prince, the urgency, the sword he carried wrapped in plain cloth. Rowan laid the cloth aside. The steel beneath was a truth, the blade of the oath guard, the thorn bloodline's unsheathed promise, pommel bright with the sigil of storm antlers. Brynjar's brows lifted. So, the house still remembers its vows. The crown asked me to look, Rowan said. Not to be seen looking. And you chose a different path. Brynjar nodded once, like a judge with a brave defendant. What do you need? A door, Rowan said. And time. Doors I have, Brynjar said, chuckling without joy. Time is a spice we ran out of last winter. Rowan's next visit was to Lord Coldmere, who met him in the forge as if warmth could be borrowed against regret. The 2 men circled truths sparingly and then admitted what neither could afford to say aloud. Malrek's searches had never been witnessed. Evidence tended to be found with a theatricality that guaranteed headlines and strangled questions. I profited, Coldmere said flatly. I did not conspire. Then help untie the knot you've worn as a medal, Rowan said. We'll need access to Malrek's papers. You're asking me to rob the crown's hound, Coldmere said, almost admiring. Fine. But if we miss, we won't, Rowan answered, because people walk forward when you let them borrow your certainty. Night bent over Eldhollow like a bough ready to loose. The keep's servant passages remembered Rowan's feet. Once, as a boy, he had raced cousins through these arteries and learned where old stones listened and where they told. Coldmere's steward produced a ring of keys with hands that did not shake only because they had been shaking too long to remember how. Malrek's chambers were neat in the way a river is neat, everything in motion arranged to pretend at stillness. Papers lay in portfolios by month and region. A travel chest stood at the bed's foot like a guard dog that eats quills. Rowan and Coldmere worked with the speed of men who hear dawn's boots. Ledgers first, payments that wanted to be mundane, reconciliation columns that balanced too beautifully, as if a painter had corrected the accounts with a brush. Then letters. Danish scripts with strange courtesies, seal wax flecked with sand from a far bay, details of harvest schedules a stranger should not know. Cold-fingered triumph prickled Rowan's skin. He felt for false bottoms and found a velvet-lined niche under the portfolio tray. From it he drew a small box, ironwood and whisper hinges. Inside lay 3 seals, the crown's wheat sheaf, the justiciar's thorn, and a third he did not recognize, 2 barbed crescents kissing. Enough? Coldmere asked. Enough to drown a city, Rowan said, voice thin. They bundled evidence into a leather satchel Bryn Jar had consecrated at the oath fire. Words matter, so do ash and salt. At the jail, Elowen's window was a mouth that didn't know how to ask. Rowan could not go to her. He left a sign where she would see it, a sprig of rosemary, remember, bound with a black ribbon, hold. Then he went to the oath fire brazier and fed it cedar until it roared. Dawn does not bargain. It arrives. And with it the assembly horn and the hall being remade into a court, the truth stone rolled to the dais, the Winterthorn crown, a relic older than the kingdom, set upon a stand like a question. The hall filled as fields fill with snow, quietly, entirely. Elders lined the benches. Coldmere took his chair with a face that dared anyone to accuse him before they'd listened properly. Malrek sat where victors sit before they know they have lost. Elowen was brought forward, wrists bound with courtesy lace that cuts slower than cord. She stood like a flag that has learned wind. In matters of treason, Malrek intoned, we conclude for the safety of the realm. He gestured to the truth stone, runes worn slick by centuries of palms. Any who would speak may touch and answer to gods and men. I will speak, Rowan said, stepping into the lantern bright with a measuredness that let breath catch around the room. He set the oathguard's point to the stone, the old rite flaring in memory's marrow. I am Rowan Thorn of House Stormetler, oathguard in the king's name, he said. I swear that Elowen Hardwick is innocent, and that a web has been spun from within law to imitate justice. So speaks a prince in love, Malrek said, almost kindly. How sweet! How compromised! Then let the Winterthorn answer instead of my heart. Rowan returned, and though he didn't look at Elowen, everyone saw. Coldmere rose with the satchel. Documents taken from the justiciar's private chest, he said. A humming filled the room, the sound gossip makes when it concedes it may need to apologize later. Coldmere laid out letters with foreign sand trapped in their wax, a ledger written in a hand so calm it had to be a lie, seals that shouldn't be elsewhere. Malrek laughed then, a small, neat sound. Forgeries, he said, and turned that good mouth of his toward the crowd. Do you think treason cannot forge itself proof? We shall verify. In time. Elowen stepped forward. In this time, she said quietly, and removed from her bodice the decree that had ended Malrek Hardwick. She set it upon the stone. This is a counterfeit, she said. She named the 5 tells, watermark absent, wax too clean, phrasing 1 legal revision behind, clerk's tale on the long S, the mill wheel missing. And what makes you expert? Malrek asked silkily. My guardian taught me to read in 3 scripts, Elowen said. The royal clerk taught me a 4th because I corrected him once, and he preferred not to be embarrassed again. She lifted the Winterthorn crown. Even men who don't believe looked away when its shadow touched her hair. I will swear it. Elowen, Rowan began. She looked at him, and the word ended. She placed the crown upon her head and pressed her palm to the stone. By winter and oath, by gods and breath, I swear this decree is false, that Malrek Hardwick was framed, that this man, she lifted her eyes to Malrek, has bartered the realm's safety for coin and power. Silence afterward was not empty. It was the room making room for consequences. Malrek stood so smoothly that men with quick hands did not reach for swords, professional admiration briefly outrunning duty. A farce, he said, and smiled the wrong smile. We will adjourn while proper scholars assess the pieces. No, Rowan said, and the word landed like a barred gate. You came to end a life before midday. You shall not ask for time now that time fails you. Malrek's gaze skated to the side door, the one officers use when verdicts go loud. Four liverymen jagged toward it and stopped all at once. A ring of townsmen had discovered they could be a wall. Elder Brynjar stepped into the clear. The old laws name a thing for liars, he said mildly. Coward's passage. Laughter shivered the tension's ice. Colmere nodded to his captain. Guards closed in, with care. Rowan lowered his sword. Ceremony matters. Just this year, he said. Will you take the Winterthorn and swear your innocence? The crown loves clarity. The hall watched Malrek's face make and unmake several strategies. Provincial fetishes don't bind the king's hand. This one predates his throne by 4 reigns, Brynjar said. And he keeps it because truth predates kings. For a breath, Malrek looked afraid. Then rage came, and behind it, stupid calculation. He grabbed a boy from the aisle, a baker's son who'd crept forward to see better. Steel flashed. Rowan moved. Later, witnesses would disagree about how many motions they saw, 1, 3, a dozen, because memory shortens clean grace. Malrek's wrist hit the stone, the knife rang away. The boy fell back into his father's arms and began to sob like a bell that refuses to crack. Malrek's knees touched tile because sometimes a man discovers gravity is a moral law. The guards took him. Bind him with soft rope, Elowen said, voice steady in the aftermath. Let him feel comfort while he contemplates how he used it to trick better men. 100 people laughed then, because relief is a wicked animal and loves permission. Rowan let out a breath he had not admitted he was holding. That day did not end, it transformed. Messengers left like arrows. Riders came with seals that did crack when unpacked. Specialist clerks tested inks and waxes and found them liars. Hostages were traced and ransoms mapped in Malrek's accounts as neat as tea trays. A week later the king himself rode to Eldhollow, tired and older in the eyes but with the stubborn mercy of good rulers. He listened, asked what hadn't been said, summoned Malrek in chains, and heard the man speak truth for the first time because the Winterthorn enjoys seeing its work finished. On the green where Eldhollow hangs washing on good days, Rowan placed a small box in Elowen's hands. Inside lay the broken Hartwick seal ring, melted, recast, and stamped fresh with the king's wheat sheaf beside the Hartwick hawk. The crown returns what was stolen, Rowan said, and begs pardon for timing. Elowen slipped the ring on and felt its weight rearrange her breath. To pardon, she said. Someone must ask. You just did. He smiled in a way that made the horizon look nearer. Stay, he said, as if he had any right to ask that of anyone. Not for the crown. Not for me. For you. Stay and practice what your hands remember. I will, she said, because there are moments when a life asks for a signature, and the pen is blood-warm and ready. That evening, townsfolk brought bread, honey, and failures to be mended. Elowen set bones and stitched fingers, brewed willowbark tea, and told 3 children the story of a crown that punishes lies so that they would learn to love truth. Rowan sat on the bench outside, sleeves rolled, sharpening no sword and learning how to be still where he wanted to be. When the moon burned a cold coin over Eldhollow, he spoke through the doorway. I must return to court long enough to give back what I borrowed. Authority? She teased. Secrecy, he said. I think I am done sneaking. Good, Elowen replied, fastening a bandage. I like you where everyone can see. 3 months remade the town. Men who had practiced sneering found honest work less exhausting. Women who had rehearsed turning away rehearsed turning back. Children relearned how to run past Elowen's gate and be called in for bread. News from the north ceased to be disaster-shaped. Patterns broke, then they stopped leaving any pattern at all. Rowan's return turned the green to a rumor before he dismounted. No fanfare, leather dusty, cloak on his saddle, not his shoulders. He had the expression of a man who had decided where to live and was simply waiting for the paperwork. Stay, he said again, because some offerings improve with repetition. You haven't asked anything reckless yet, Elowen replied, eyes bright. He reached into his saddlebag and drew out 2 rings, one gold, once belonging to Elowen's grandmother, one silver, shaped from the pommel plate of the oath guard he had set aside. The blacksmith had braided them into bands that caught light as if light preferred them. If you'll take me as I am, he said. Prince when duty drags me, man when I am free, both when I am wise. Both, she echoed, breathless and laughing, which is how vows like to be born. But Rowan, no more rescuing as a hobby. We rescue with each other, not to each other. Agreed, he said. I am tired of being a single blade. Let's be shears. They wet under the ash pillars that had once ignored her. The Winterthorn sat like a witness who has learned to relax. Lord Coldmere made a proper speech that apologized in 9 separate ways without saying the word once. Elder Brynjar cried into his beard and pretended he'd inhaled smoke. The baker's boy brought 2 buns and stood like a guard at Elowen's skirt. When their lips met, the hall's lanterns seemed to tilt. It may have been wind. It may have been all at once relief. Later they walked to the stone circle above the town where larks make arguments with sky. Elowen leaned into Rowan's side and said the 4 words that once changed everything. Act like you're with me. He wrapped her in the fox-lined cloak and answered. I don't act any more. Eldhollow learned to be a place where mended things were not called broken. The clinic at the riverbend opened its shutters at dawn, herbs strung to dry like little suns, baths steaming, children laughing because the woman with the auburn hair told fevers to leave and sometimes they obeyed. Elowen's beauty, once treated like contraband, became the town's unremarked light, the kind people moved through with gratitude and without greed. Rowan trained the watch in the art of concluding fights early. He wrote letters with the patience of someone disassembling a bomb with a spoon, slow, certain, unafraid to look foolish. When the crown sent for judgments, he went. When the realm needed a sword, he chose whether to lend it. Men who had been taught that stoicism means silence learned it can mean listening. On clear nights they visited the oath fire brazier and fed its cedar. Truth likes a stage, Elowen said once. And we built it one, Rowan replied. Odd work for a pair who only wanted a dance. Dances build empires, she said. Or rescue them, he said, and kissed her until the brazier's sparks pretended to be stars. When the first snow came early, Rowan woke to Elowen sketching by the window, plans for a herb garden wall that would warm in winter. You're beautiful, he said, because he never stopped saying it, because yesterday she had saved a farmer's hand, because he believed praise is a daily bread and refused to go hungry. So are you, she answered, and threw a cushion that missed. In spring, the king visited without entourage, tired and curious. He walked Eldhollow like a man touring a house his grandfather built. He sat by the river with Elowen and asked, Is your work enough? It is more, she said. Enough looks like this from the inside. He found Rowan after, clapped his shoulder. Stay where you're useful, he ordered, which in a good kingdom is how a blessing sometimes gets phrased. Send me men who believe in truth more than victory. I married one, Rowan said. I'll send her too. The king laughed, and for a moment looked like a cousin again. At midsummer, 3 refugees arrived, quiet, thin, carrying a letter impressed with the double-barbed crescents of a forgotten guild. Elowen read the script, traced the wax grit, lifted her eyes to Rowan. There are more knots, she said. Then, Rowan answered, already reaching for cloak and satchel. We have more shears. They left that afternoon with bread still warm, promises to return, and the certainty that all true stories end the same way, not with the door closing, but with 2 people stepping through together. Spring arrived early, impatient and loud. Snow melted before the festivals were ready, and the river Fen, once a humble silver vein through farmland, rose until it spoke with a voice too heavy for its bed. Elowen stood on the bridge, skirts damp, wind combing her hair. "It doesn't smell like rain," she said. Rowan crouched by the stone rail. "It smells like the mountain cracked." That night a messenger arrived from Fenbrook, 20 miles east, dams groaning, families fleeing, and an inland tide devouring everything that once obeyed gravity. Eldhollow sent what it could, boats, grain, healers, but by morning the river had swallowed the road. Rowan strapped his sword. "We ride by Ridge Trail." Elowen packed her salves and whispered to the stable master, "Keep every hearth lit until we return. Floods hate light." They rode into a world gone gray, hooves splashing through ghost-colored rain, thunder echoing like angry gods remembering names. Fenbrook no longer had streets, only currents. Roofs jutted like tombstones, shutters floated like broken wings. From the bell tower came faint ringing, the church had become an island. Rowan guided the horses through waist-deep water. A child's cry pierced the wind. Elowen dismounted, wading toward the sound. Beneath an overturned cart, a woman clutched her son, eyes wide with exhaustion. "Hold still," Elowen murmured, pressing her palm to the woman's brow. Warmth spilled from her hand, not magic exactly, but certainty, the kind that tells fear it may leave. "You'll see morning?" Rowan lifted the boy onto his shoulders. "We need higher ground." They ferried survivors to the bell tower until it trembled under the weight of 30 souls. When the tide surged again, Rowan braced the doors with pews. Elowen climbed the stairs and rang the bell herself, its bronze voice crying for help across miles of drowned valley. By dawn, water glimmered crimson with sunrise, and something else. Near the mill sluice floated barrels marked with the sigil of House Marek, nobles entrusted to maintain the dams. The barrels leaked black pitch, heavy with powdered granite. Sabotage, not storm. Rowan kicked one open. "They weakened the gates deliberately." Elowen frowned. "Why destroy your own lands?" "To divert trade routes. Flood Fenbrook, make Eldhollow the only safe crossing, and charge tolls." Anger tasted like iron on her tongue. "Then they drowned 1,000 souls for coin." They buried the dead on the hillside as ravens watched in patient hunger. Elowen's prayers came low and hard. "If truth remembers us," she whispered, "let it remember this cost." Rowan placed his hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll remind the crown." They traveled to Archenkeep, capital of the southern marches, where justice sat gilded and deaf. The court was celebrating the king's 50-year reign. Musicians drowned the sound of hunger outside. Rowan strode through the marble hall still wearing mud and blood. Courtiers gasped. Elowen did not slow. She threw a water-soaked satchel before the steward's dais. Barrels, seals, ledgers, forged orders, all proof. "House Marek drowned Fenbrook," she said, voice cutting through the music. "And unless your king wishes to rule over ghosts, he'll hear us now." Silence rippled outward. Then, from behind the dais, the king himself rose, older than rumor, sharp as flint. "You are Rowan Thorn, once of the Thunder Sworn, and the healer of Eldhollow, the light bearers of Winterthorn." Elowen bowed. "Still at your service, Majesty." "Then speak your truth," he said, "and be prepared to defend it." The trial was held 3 days later in the Hall of Weighing, where chains hung above a reflecting pool said to mirror guilt. Lord Marek stood smug beside his advocates. He sneered at Elowen. "A peasant healer presumes to lecture nobility on stewardship?" She met his gaze. "A healer knows when rot starts under gold leaf." Rowan stepped forward, placing on the stone table a flask of the very pitch that had sealed the dam's doom. "Light it." When the torch touched it, blue fire hissed, proof of engineered collapse. The king's advisors murmured. Marek blanched. "Forgery!" Rowan's sword rang free. "You mistake me for a liar." The king raised a hand. "Enough." His gaze cooled the hall. "The truth stands heavier than your titles, Lord Marek." He turned to Elowen. "And what would justice look like to the drowned?" She answered softly. "Let their children live above the water. Take Marek's coffers, rebuild Fenbrook, and forbid profit on any bridge he planned." The decree was written before dusk. Weeks later, Fenbrook began to breathe again. Rowan oversaw new levees, stone, not greed. Elowen taught children to plant willow saplings whose roots would bind the river banks. Each trunk bore a small copper charm etched with a lantern. At night they sat by the new waterline, watching moonlight spill silver over calm current. "You always rebuild," Rowan said quietly. Elowen smiled. "Someone has to teach the river forgiveness." He slipped an arm around her. "And who teaches you?" "The river," she whispered. "It forgets, but it never stops moving." They stayed until dawn, when the first green shoots broke through the receded silt, tiny and defiant, like hope pretending to be grass. A year later, the Festival of Lanterns returned. Eldhollow and Fenbrook shared one sky. Children floated lights upon the river, none sank. The king's messenger arrived bearing a scroll sealed in white wax. To Rowan and Elowen of Eldhollow. By decree of His Majesty, you are named Wardens of the Northern Waters, guardians of trade and truth alike. May your flame outlast the flood. Rowan laughed for the first time in months. Wardens. Sounds almost restful. Elowen's eyes caught the lanterns drifting downstream. Nothing about truth is restful. But it's beautiful work. They raised their joined hands as the current carried hundreds of tiny fires toward the sea, each light a promise that memory, once rescued, could become peace. The first whispers came on the backs of salt-wet traders from the south, gray blight, a breath-borne sickness that began as ash dust at the lips and ended with lungs turning to cinders. Ports shuddered, priests preached through cloth, captains took to sea rather than go ashore. By the time the rumor reached Eldhollow, a single rider brought proof, a man swaying in the saddle, mouth ringed in slate. Elowen caught him before he fell. His breath rattled like pebbles in a drum. "Tidehaven," he rasped. "Keys locked. The Ashen Crown, selling dispensations, coin buys exit." Rowan's jaw set. "A quarantine for sale is a siege by other means." He looked to Elowen. "What do you need?" "A cordon. Boiling tents. Vinegar steam. Willow bark, pine distillate, mallow tea to soften breath. And obedience." She lifted her eyes to the watching crowd. "If I say do not embrace your kin, you will hold the line with love, not arms." No one argued. The rider died before midnight. Elowen washed and bound him, then burned the cloths herself while the town watched and learned the shape of necessary cruelty. At dawn, a white seal arrived, wax stamped with a crown of thorns wrought in ash. The Ashen Crown, a council of coastal lords and physicians claiming sovereignty in plague, ordered all inland towns to send their healers to Tidehaven or face trade interdiction. Rowan folded the order once. "They want to draft you," Elowen answered softly. "They want to draft every town's breath. We'll go. But we choose our law." Tidehaven's walls glittered with salt and caution. Banners of gray linen hung at each gate, daubed with symbols for clean and quarantine. Within, streets were swept to wet stone, crier boys sang rules, traders kept count of their coffs the way gamblers count coins. At the harbor fortress, the Ashen Crown received them in a hall that smelled of lime wash and vinegar. Magister Cithril, narrow-eyed and narrow-hearted, presided. "Healers of Eldhollow," he intoned, "you are seconded to Crown service. You will instruct our wards and sign off on our certificates of freedom." Elowen inclined her head. "We'll treat the sick. We'll advise on containment. But we will not sign freedom to those who aren't free of contagion." Cithril's smile was a blade kept clean. "You will if ordered." Rowan stepped half a pace forward, voice quiet enough to carry. "Orders that sell death are not law. They are invoices." A few physicians in the gallery looked down, guilty of understanding. Elowen began at the shore ward, caught space by rope's length, windows ripped from frames for air, kettles going always. She trained crews to steam vinegar and pine over basins, to time breathing with the kettle's hiss, to count pulses by verses rather than panic seconds. She hung sprigs of thyme not as charm, but as instruction. The room must smell sharp, not sweet. By dusk, she had a ledger of what worked and what didn't. By midnight, she had enemies, men whose coin came from stamped paper that said clean when breath still smoked gray. On the third day, a riverboat limped in with a family from Fendale, a mother coughing ash, a father hollow-eyed, a girl with clear lungs and a fear that made her fierce. The father begged to stay with his wife. Elowen took his hands. You will make her sicker by loving her with nearness. Love her with distance. Be the wall that keeps disease from finding your daughter. He flinched as if struck, then nodded and let himself be led away. The girl clung to Elowen's skirt. Will my mother die? Elowen knelt. I don't know. But we'll fight for her. Rowan watched from the threshold and understood something he hadn't named. Elowen could tell people to do the hardest thing and leave them more whole, not less. He stepped aside as she passed. What do you need? He asked again, meaning now. A law that values breath over ledgers, she said. And you to hold the line when my compassion tempts me to break it. He bowed his head. Command me. Cithral pressed harder. Certificates for crews whose owners paid, clean slips for caravans that sponsored Ashen Crown chapels, compassion clauses, for nobles with palanquins and pretty pleas. Elowen refused all, signing only when a breath ran clear for 7 days and fingers no longer smudged slate on a cloth. You obstruct commerce, Cithral hissed in private. I obstruct plague, she replied. Commerce will survive honesty. Bodies won't survive your indulgences. He moved to ban her from the wards. Rowan arrived with 3 captains and a rolled writ bearing the king's seal, the Winterthorn Ordinance, revived. In matters of truth and contagion, any order that contradicts the appointed healer's judgment is null when the Winterthorn burns. The brazier in Tidehaven Square had been lit at dawn at Rowan's request, a cold white fire answering Highvale. Cithral read, paled, and smiled thinner. Very well. Counsel, not command. He pivoted then, sideways like a crab, and went to the docks, where coins still listened to him. That night, a warehouse burned. The next dawn, 3 men with grey lips were found wearing clean slips tight as talismans. Elowen stood in the square and held one up. Paper does not make lungs. Crowd sentiment shifted, shame finally louder than greed. An inland caravan arrived with a noble house and their priest. The lady's veil hid a cough, her groom's impatience hid nothing. They had a wedding contract and a dowry train and an invitation to ignore everyone else's rules. 7 days, Elowen said. Your love can wait. It cannot, the groom snarled. You earthborn never understand the value of time. Rowan looked at him with the melancholy pity he reserved for men about to learn. Time is why you're not widowed yet. The priest attempted doctrine, Elowen offered practice. 2 rooms facing each other across a courtyard, a rope strung between windows. Speak your vows across the distance that keeps you alive. Bind your hands to the rope and pull together. At the end of 7 days, if breath is clean, finish the knot. They laughed at first. Then they tried it, because love likes games when terror bites ankles. Each day they tied a new knot, prayers carried along the rope like couriers. On the 7th day, the lady's cough had gone, the groom's impatience had learned manners, and the rope came down to great cheering. The priest blessed what had already been made holy by discipline. Even Cithral admitted, through gritted civility, that the tale sold more compliance than threats. Elowen hung the rope in the ward as a lesson. This, she told the crew, is how law becomes loved. The Ashen Crown was not done. A white mask appeared, an agent dressed like a physician, handing out vials with the 6-pointed blossom Elowen had come to loathe. Preventive tonic, he crooned. Charity's kiss. Elowen tested it publicly, sugar, mica, bindweed. The crowd muttered. The mask changed tactics, whispering of a healer who kept families apart for pleasure, of a prince playing tyrant. They tried to turn Rowan's stoicism into indifference. He answered by working the night shifts, cleaning cots, hauling water, speaking quietly with the bereaved, no speeches, just presence. The rumor found itself unemployed. The mask set a final snare, a cart of grain soaked in pitch, disguised as a donation and parked beside the ward. Elowen smelled the wrong sweetness seconds before a spark would have turned hope to cinders. Rowan kicked the cart into the canal and followed it with the saboteur. The man flailed. Rowan hauled him out by the collar and held him against the quay stones. "Mercy is not immunity," he said. "Name your paymaster." "The chapel is dead," the mask sputtered. "Coin is not. Ask Marek's cousins." "Marek has no cousins," Rowan said. "Not anymore." The mask tried to bite his own tongue. Elowen pried his jaw open with a spoon and a healer's implacability. "Not today," she said. "Today you live long enough to testify." The hardest wave crested with a north wind. Cots overflowed, vinegar stung every eye, ash coughed up from lungs turned basins gray. Elowen's hands cracked under lie. Rowan's stitches pulled once, and he ignored them until she sewed him by lamplight with an affection that scolded and saved. At midnight, the Fendale girl's mother turned the corner, breath loosening at last. Elowen sat with her through the small hours, counting heartbeats by reciting herbs under her breath. "Time, yarrow, mallow, willow." "Magic?" the woman whispered. "Memory," Elowen answered. "Of what works?" At dawn the kettles hissed less desperately. Ash fell to the ward floor instead of rising from chests. The town had learned the habits that outlive plague: air, heat, distance, honesty. Cithril tried to claim credit. The crowd gave it to the winter-white brazier and the woman with cracked hands. Rowan slept on his feet in the doorway and finally let gravity win when Elowen touched his shoulder. He awoke hours later to the sound of laughter, the first true kind Tidehaven had made in weeks. The Ashen Crown disbanded itself with the speed of men who sense consequences approaching. Cithril resigned to a monastery where humility was a new language. The white mask testified before the king and then vanished into a life where no one trusted him even with a spoon. Tidehaven reopened, slowly, wisely. Certificates became something earned, not purchased. The king came quietly, without trumpets, and lit the brazier in the square with his own hand from a lantern carried down from Highvale. He thanked Elowen and Rowan with words that felt heavier than coin. "You made law, beloved," he said. "I haven't always managed that." Rowan bowed only slightly. "We made practice visible, Majesty." Law followed. Elowen asked for no title, only grain for the winter wards and copper for clean wells. He granted both and, unprompted, sent scribes to every shire with a simple proclamation: in sickness, truth governs; in quarantine, kindness commands; certificates without breath are lies. Elowen asked for no title, only grain for the winter wards and copper for clean wells. He granted both and, unprompted, sent scribes to every shire with a simple proclamation: in sickness, truth governs; in quarantine, kindness commands; certificates without breath are lies. They rode home along a road that seemed wider. Eldhollow met them with stew and teasing. The baker's boy, now a watchman, saluted with a real sword and blushed when Elowen praised his footwork. Brynjar wept into his beard again and blamed smoke that wasn't there. That night they stood by the oath fire. "What happens now?" Rowan asked, because tradition sweetens work. Elowen looked at the clinic's lamplight, at the school growing to meet the need other towns confessed, at the river wearing its lanterns like jewelry. "No," she said. "We rest until morning. And then we teach the next town to fall in love with truth." Rowan smiled the slow, entire smile of a man whose vows fit like well-worn leather. "Act like you're with me." "I'm not acting," she answered, and kissed him until the brazier's sparks pretended to be stars. The letter came sealed with the king's wheat sheaf and written in his own hand. The realm must not rely on fortune and a single pair of hands. Make us many healers. Teach them as you would your own blood. Elowen read it aloud beneath the sycamore where she and Rowan often planned what came next. "He's right," she said. "We've built habits. Now we must build inheritance." Rowan smiled. "Then Eldhollow becomes more than a village, it becomes a forge." They chose the old monastery on the ridge, its stones scarred by flood and time, its bells still honest. Within months masons repaired the roof, nocturne scribes brought desks and ink, apprentices arrived from every shire, farm daughters, blacksmiths' sons, widows of war, Anyone who had watched breath leave a body and wanted to know how to stop it next time. The first oath Elowen made them write was simple. We serve truth before comfort, mercy before fame, life before law that forgets its purpose. The building took the name whispered by travelers before it had a sign, the Ember College, because its lights never went out. Word of the college reached Scholar Varys of Archenkeep, a physician favored by courts and allergic to humility. He arrived with a retinue and a challenge, a public disputation. Your methods breed rebellion, Varys announced before a hall full of students. You teach peasants to question prescriptions older than they are. Elowen answered quietly. Because sickness changes faster than tradition. Varys struck the floor with his staff. Then we shall test method with method. A duel of cures. One patient, two healers. The council will judge. Rowan's hand found the hilt of patience. And if you lose? I shall yield my seat at court, Varys said. And if she loses, this Ember College closes. The king, intrigued and wary, sanctioned the contest. The patient, a miner poisoned by blackwood dust, lay between them. Varys bled him by textbook. Elowen steamed his lungs with pine, set his breath to rhythm, fed him warm milk thick with mallow. By dawn the miner sat upright, pale but smiling. Varys's patient, treated by rules not reason, slept without waking. The court was silent until the king spoke. Scholar Varys, yield your seat. Learn instead. Varys bowed stiffly, but his eyes, when they met Elowen's, held something new, curiosity uncloaking pride. That winter, a fire started in the copy hall, inkoils, a lantern left too long. Rowan reached it first, hauling buckets while students formed lines. Books hissed as if alive. Elowen arrived barefoot, throwing salt to smother flame, shouting for the apothecary records first, then the oaths. When smoke cleared, half the shelves were ash. She sank to her knees, blackened fingers trembling. Rowan knelt beside her. You can rewrite pages, he said. They weren't just pages, she whispered. They were proof that we learned. Then we'll prove it again. He took her soot-streaked hand. Every student remembers what you taught them. Memory is flame that doesn't burn out. Within a week, dictation filled the courtyard. Students recited from memory, scribes copied. Varys himself oversaw ink mixing with the care of penance. The rewritten texts bore a new seal, a lantern rising from a coal. The Ember College's influence spread faster than rumor. Carpenters sent sons to learn anatomy for splintcraft. Soldiers came to study first aid. Even priests arrived to reconcile prayer with hygiene. Not everyone approved. Guilds feared lost monopolies. When the Masons' League threatened boycott, Rowan invited them to a Concord table. You fear this place will take your craft, he said. It will sharpen it instead. We'll train your apprentices in bone geometry. You teach ours to build walls that breathe. Deals were struck over bread and cider. The college gained sponsors. The guilds gained graduates who could both heal and build. Elowen watched from the cloister balcony. You make politics look like patience. Rowan shrugged. They're the same muscle if you use it kindly. At solstice, the first cohort faced the trial of proof, not written, but lived. Each apprentice drew a sealed case, fever, fracture, famine, fear, and demonstrated not miracle, but method. The townsfolk watched, learning as they cheered. When all had passed, Elowen spoke beneath lantern light. You are not heroes. You are habits the world can trust. Rowan added, and habits win wars without swords. The king's emissary proclaimed the Ember College a royal institution of healing, self-governing under the Winterthorn Ordinance. Elowen declined a crown of laurels, accepting instead a plain brass lamp to hang in the hall. Let this remind us, glory burns out, light stays busy. Weeks later, Varys sought her in the herb garden. Frost silvered the beds, rosemary crackled underfoot. I once thought mercy weakened order, he admitted. Now I see it keeps order human. Elowen smiled. Then teach that. Our next students will need both of us. He inclined his head. If you will have a proud man learning to kneel. I collect such men. she said, glancing toward the courtyard where Rowan drilled recruits. They do fine once they learn balance. At year's end, every village lit a lantern in thanks to the healers trained that year. From the ridge, Eldhollow looked like a constellation fallen to earth. Rowan wrapped his arm around Elowen's shoulders. Do you ever think we've done enough? He asked. She leaned into him. Enough is the enemy of good. Tomorrow there'll be hunger somewhere, fever somewhere. That's not defeat, that's direction. They watched the lanterns drift upward, hundreds of small suns refusing to be ordinary night. The wars faded. The floods receded. The sicknesses that once whispered through villages now met organized hands, not panic. And in every corner of the kingdom, a healer's lamp burned, small, steady, borrowed from Eldhollow's flame. The Ember College grew into a city of study, its halls lined with odes rather than portraits. Children who had never known famine recited Elowen's maxims as easily as their own names. Travelers came from far realms to learn the way of clear breath and honest scales. Rowan taught fewer drills and more judgment. His hair silvered, his voice roughened, but his strides still measured truth from pretense. Elowen's hands, though scarred, stayed sure. She began each morning as she always had, with steam, herbs, and a reminder: the cure begins with listening. They aged like oak and ivy, root and climb, strength and grace, entwined until neither could be told apart. One winter, when snow fell too quietly, Elowen did not rise. She smiled in sleep, murmuring a herb's name, perhaps a memory. Rowan sat beside her bed for 2 days, speaking softly about fields and festivals, about the baker's boy, now captain of the watch, and how the king still owed them dinner. On the 3rd morning, she was gone. The king himself came to Eldhollow for the funeral. Villagers lined the road with lanterns, not for mourning, but gratitude. When the pyre caught, the flames did not roar, they glowed, gentle as her voice. Rowan placed her brass lamp atop the wood. She gave us a light we don't have to carry alone, he said. That night, he climbed the ridge and lit the oath fire one last time. The wind pulled tears sideways, but his posture stayed the same, unbent, watchful. Act like you're with me, he whispered. The flame flickered, and for a moment, he felt her hand, warm as memory, in his. Years later, children born after both of them were gone learned their names as history. Travelers arriving from distant shores spoke of the land of 1,000 lanterns, where healers served without fear, where laws bent toward mercy because once, 2 people taught the world that truth was worth the work. At the Ember College's gate, carved in stone beneath the arch, their creed endures. We serve truth before comfort, mercy before fame, life before law that forgets its purpose. And each year, on the night the oath fire is lit, the wind seems to carry 2 voices. One calm, one steady, saying together, now, we do more of what works.